All right, welcome back to State of the State, the State of the Western Region 2012. In our discussion on education this morning, I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Will Austin, who's our host today, and president of Warren County Community College, and Dr. Rosalie Lamonte, who is the interim executive superintendent in Warren County.
And Sussex County.
And Sussex County.
Yes.
So thank you both for being here this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, you have a beautiful facility here. And
Oh, thank you very much.
do. And as you pointed out earlier, we've done a lot of these. This is our 10th one of these that we've done as we've traveled almost across the entire state. We have South Jersey coming up, but we've been almost everywhere else, Essex County this Friday. And one of the things that we've really all been struck by is the enormous resource that we have in New Jersey in our community colleges. I think we're really very fortunate in New Jersey to have this system. Can you expound on that a bit?
Well, I think one of the great things is the community colleges came to New Jersey kind of late in the whole history of community colleges in America. It was one of the last states to really begin to found the community colleges. So they really started in the 70s and 80s, and it was a slow building process. But one of the nice things that by coming to the table late was we were able to look at what everybody else had done and pick some of the best models. So people often think of us as a place where students go for their credit education. And you know, when they first were founded, it was a place you went to if you couldn't go anywhere else. But it's really become a place people have realized has great economic value for credit education, is very affordable, has a great return on investment, you get a great education, and it's right in your backyard. So as students have become taken longer to mature into adulthood, it's a great place where parents, for younger people, can be with their children longer and have them grow at the pace I think more parents are comfortable with today. And the other great thing about community colleges credit enrollment is it's always here for anyone who didn't take advantage of higher education straight out of high school. So that makes it a great benefit. But the interesting thing is, you know, at Warren, we probably have about 2,000 credit, which you would think of as traditional college students. And we have anywhere from 4,000 to 6,000 in any given year of non-credit students. And those students would be going right into the workforce after an 8-month program. They would be business employees employed in local businesses that we're retraining. So we're involved in economic development activities.
So what's the percentage of in your student body of people who are coming here right out of high school versus people who may have been out for a while in the workforce?
Okay, for the credit side, it's probably running at this point about 60% right out of high school, probably about 40% out of the workforce. That was a little higher in recent years because of the economy. As people go out of their job, they often come back to their community college to get retrained for a new job. In our non-credit program, it's either people in the workforce for the most part or people who found themselves coming into a program so that 9 months later they could be back in the workforce. So that probably ranges about 80% to 90% of that population. So a great deal of our students are adult students, 25 plus years old.
And certainly you've probably seen a change, I would think, in the past few years, and the economy's had an impact on that as well.
Well, the economy had an impact, and the other thing that's going to have a great impact on that is there are less people graduating because of the population shift, the baby boom echo coming towards its end. There are less people graduating straight from high school and coming into the community college. So our larger populations in the future will be adult returning students.
Oh, so it's lifetime learners. We're focusing on that.
Everyone
here.
is a lifetime learner.
Indeed. So, Dr. Lamonte, it's interesting as we've heard about how the community college role is really changing, how it's evolved from kind of that place of last resort to really a choice for a lot of people, a very positive choice. In your role as a K-12 superintendent, how do you feel that when you equip your students for the future, you know, it's one of an array of choices, I would assume, but a strong choice in New Jersey.
Oh, definitely. Community colleges are very much in the forefront in Warren and Sussex counties. Many of our students decide that because the community college is such a great value and offers such fine programs, that it really makes economic sense as well as academic sense for them to attend a community college. And the focus now in the Department of Education is to graduate every student college and career ready so that there isn't that gap when they leave high school and have to enter college and take a lot of remediation courses. We want to see that number of remediation courses decrease dramatically, and also that students are ready. It absolutely is, yeah. Mm-hmm. And for businesses as well. Mm-hmm. When students enter the workforce, they need to be ready to assume the responsibilities of the position that they get.
Right. A lot of the work that you do is remediation in a community college.
Yeah, and this is a fascinating thing, and this is a nationwide problem. It's certainly not a New Jersey kind of problem. The question that I always have, and I'll probably be the one person who says this, is it's the wrong question.
Okay, what's the
Wrong
right
question is to say, is there an increase in remediation, or is there too much remediation going on at college? I think the K-12 districts have done a phenomenal job of revamping their curriculums to get in line with the workforce of tomorrow. Now, I say this, you have to have one caveat. I live with someone who has been a K-12 math teacher and a higher education math teacher. So I've seen it from that person's perspective from both angles. And I saw what was happening in K-12, and it was a tremendous amount of work. Now, what happens is, in most of our students who need remediation probably need it in math, although there are some in English. But here's some of the issues. One, nobody does remediation exactly the same way in higher education. No one says this is where remediation begins. And the word remediation itself kind of suggests that you didn't succeed in your high school endeavors.
Exactly.
And that's not true.
You're making up for something that
You
you should have
succeeded
had.
in high school. You graduated. What happened was high school ended at one place, we started at another place in most
So
cases.
is there a way to have better articulation between the high school experience so that we can, because no matter, even though we want to take away the stigma perhaps from remediation, it's expensive, it's time consuming, and does kind of imbue a sense of
Well,
failure.
I'm going to ask you a different question.
Okay,
Who says it's remedial? Who decided this?
Good.
You're talking about an education system that's still based in the 18th century on an agricultural-based calendar, schedule, and knowledge base. Now, if you take a step back and you think about, and I'm going to use a fancy word and then I'll explain what it is, epistemology, or the study of knowledge. What knowledge do people need to be successful?
A lot
We're
of-
assuming they need this. Have we really studied it? Do we really know that they need that? I don't think we do. So there was a time, there's a book in the 70s that came out called The Structures of Scientific Revolutions. And it was a guy by the name of Thomas Kuhn who looked at physics from a philosophical standpoint. And he said, up until the early 20th century, they couldn't solve the problems of physics because they were using Newtonian physics. Then a man named Albert Einstein came along and said, well, you know what the problem is? That paradigm you're using can't solve the basic problems of physics because it's fundamentally flawed. So you have to use Einstein's theories to move physics forward. We have the same problem in education. We're using a model of higher education that was based and built in Paris, France, 1,000 years ago. So we have 1,000 years of tradition. Then in America, we tied on 200 years of bureaucracy, and we're wondering why it doesn't work today.
And-
The reason it doesn't work is you got to rip it down and start again.
and given that we're in a state that, am I wrong, we don't have a higher education chancellor anymore in New Jersey? We have, what, a higher ed commission, or do
We have a higher ed commission, yes,
Yeah.
with a director.
Yeah, and we're preparing our first ballot initiative to fund higher education in, what, 40-some years?
This was the late 1980s,
That's
I
right.
believe was the last time.
Yeah, so I guess the question would be, from your perspective, and now as a superintendent in 2 counties, you're in a really unique position to see a lot of the changes that are taking place
Yes.
in the Department of Education.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really struck by that.
Yeah.
I think, I'm actually a former teacher, so I've gone through, and a former Board of Ed member, so.
Oh, so you have a good handle on
At
that.
both sides
Yes,
of it, yeah.
yes.
And I think that the changes in the Department of Education that are taking place are really structurally pretty far-reaching.
They absolutely are. The focus now is definitely on student achievement and on concentrating on those schools specifically that are deemed priority or focus schools, where students are not graduating at the levels that they should be, and/or where students are simply not achieving at the proficiency levels that the state has deemed acceptable.
Is there a fear on some parts that, I mean, the great vast majority of these schools, if you're not a focus school, what happens to you? I mean, do these schools feel like they're still going to get the attention and the funding that they need, or is there going to be a shift that's?
I think there's a definite shift that if a school is doing something right, maybe we should just get out of the way and leave them alone to do what they're doing and to advance their skills and knowledge in educating the student population. And as Will said, in Sussex and Warren, we have phenomenal schools. Our students are producing excellent results. Really, the achievement levels are very high across the board. We have very, very few exceptions. So that if you look at the list of priority schools or focus schools where all of the attention and the resources will now be focused, we only have one in Warren County and one in Sussex that is going to come off the list because it was really an error in the way data was reported. So you're not looking at anything across the board where you see in other areas of the state that there are some major problems. There are really no major problems in the schools in these counties. Can we do better? Of course we can do better. But the way the state is looking at it right now is, where is the attention being focused now? And is it being diluted simply because it's being spread over so many districts, over 600 districts? Shouldn't we instead focus our attention on those schools that are simply not doing well?
If there's no push coming from the State Department of Education to consolidate or to shrink some of these districts?
Well, definitely the state would like to see more regionalization and consolidation. There has been a move to encourage shared services across the board. We have many districts that are sharing all types of things, not only superintendents, business administrators, and other types of personnel, but they are also sharing in economies of scale, purchasing power, all types of things, books, fuel supplies, electricity, so that in those economies of scale, the monies that are saved can be obviously sent back into the classroom.
That's certainly one of the feelings that's being put forth and then implemented by this administration, is that they've termed it a culture of overregulation in education, just like we see in business, as we talked about in the last panel. Do you feel that there is a culture of overregulation in New Jersey schools?
Definitely, I think that's been a trend for a long time. As Dr. Austin mentioned, there's been a huge bureaucracy that has kind of self-perpetuated itself. But the task force that just came out with its report in September, the Education Transformation Task Force, has indicated many, many regulations that can be revamped or simply eliminated. And now it is going to be up to the State Board of Education to tackle those that are in its purview, to see what exactly can be eliminated.
And in higher education, do you feel the same culture of regulations?
There's more regulation than probably is often helpful for the learning environment, for the students per se. There are some regulations that obviously are needed, but there are regulations that exist, that have existed for quite some time, that have not been helpful to the learning environment, and they're not helpful to change. One of the things that did happen in New Jersey is when the chancellor's position was abolished and the Department of Higher Education was abolished, the governing bodies became the boards of trustees at the various colleges, state colleges and community colleges. And that gave a lot of ability locally for us to modify what we do, look at what we do, and then look at the community we serve and build a school or a college that really is here to serve this particular community and what its needs are at the time. That isn't to say the 19 community colleges don't work very well together around the state.
They do work very closely together with the county council, right? The Council of County Colleges.
Correct.
Yeah.
And we do a lot of shared services activities, consortiums. We do a lot of workforce development shared throughout the state. We do a lot of purchasing shared throughout the state, where we use the collective body of all 19 community colleges. And most people don't really usually realize that as a sector, the community colleges train more people in higher education than all the other sectors, than the universities, the research universities, or the state colleges. We actually have more students than they do. So these regulations do affect what we can and can't do, because ultimately, as we try to move everyone towards a bachelor's degree, we need this cooperation with the other sectors as well. And we need space in these schools for our students to go to. And that's one of the reasons why that bond measure is on the ballot, because we are really in a crunch in New Jersey for space, academic space for our students.
And that's one of the reasons it's cited, I think, as the reasons we have such a high number of high school graduates leaving the state.
New Jersey has traditionally, for probably over 40 years, had the highest export of students to other colleges around the country. So, and other colleges and other states realize this, and they recruit very heavily in New Jersey for our students. Here's one, a great example is a place like Arizona. When you're in Arizona, because of the way higher education emerged there, and think we had Harvard, Yale, and Princeton, all these schools in the Northeast. So that's what started here first. As people immigrated out to the West Coast, they started community colleges first. So their homegrown students don't even think about going to the state school unless they're going to play a sport or something. They think about go to a community college, then I'll transfer. Well, that creates a problem for a place like University of Arizona. They need to fill those first
Right.
2 years. So they found a great place called New Jersey, and they suck off our students, and then we never get them back into our economy.
The cream of the
So
crop,
the
yeah.
community colleges have to serve that role here of getting them started here, especially when there's capacity issues at the higher education sector.
Do you see this? I mean, do you think this is something that the State Department is actually working on, and that it's a philosophy in this administration to try to keep our high school graduates here in the state?
Well, definitely there is a move towards emphasizing the benefits of a local college education and specifically ties with community colleges. There's a big movement there to have lots of partnership programs between high schools and the local community colleges. And we see a lot of those success stories in our Warren and Sussex schools, definitely.
It is a real drag on our economy, I know, in New
Oh,
Jersey,
sure.
because we're taking the best students off and stay and live where
Sure.
they've gone to school.
Sure.
It's,
And many times, they don't return.
Right.
You know, if they go to Arizona or California or the Midwest, they will stay there.
And given the investment we put in K-12 education in this state,
Exactly.
we're really financing another state's
We're doing an
economic
excellent
future.
job giving other states
Yeah.
economic power
Yeah.
over us.
Exactly.
You know, you mentioned, Dr. Lamonte, that you started out as a classroom teacher
Yes,
and as a principal and a district superintendent,
Mm-hmm.
so a lifelong educator.
yes.
What do you think is the secret to building a successful school?
Well, definitely it's the staff. You need effective teachers in front of students, and that's the bottom line. That's why the state is looking at reforming teacher tenure laws and also reforming educator evaluation systems.
There's a lot of, I think, a trepidation over the new teacher evaluation forms.
Sure.
How do you think this is actually going to play out?
Well, I think that teachers are going to be part of this, so that in a district, there will be committees comprised of staff members, administrators, parents, and board members that will work on developing a fair and equitable evaluation system, so that every teacher will know beforehand how he or she's going to be evaluated. And that's only fair, quite frankly. There shouldn't be different standards depending on who comes in to see you on a
Right.
given day.
Right.
There should be an equitable system. So I think in the long run that everyone's going to be on board with this,
So you're pretty optimistic about that?
definitely.
Yeah, yeah.
Definitely.
And from your perspective, you see the students coming in, what kind of a chance do you really have to gauge the schools that they come out of? I guess you see the end result.
Well, I mean, we can see a lot of things based on even the developmental kind of testing that we do. And I'm born and bred in New Jersey, so and I've worked at the community colleges I've worked at have been all over the state. But I can tell you that Warren County and Sussex County in this part of the region is preparing its students better than other places I have been. It's a homogeneous kind of population, so that helps a great deal in making sure that they're successful coming in, and it helps the schools be able to create programs for them before they get to us. But I mean, I'm not as concerned about that element from this perspective. I'm more concerned about the element of, as we create a society where we say more people need to be college educated, we need to have better success rates. And we used to be #1 in the world, and then depending on whose study you look at now, we're either 10th or 15th.
Right.
We haven't gotten any better, we haven't gotten any worse. Other countries around the world have gotten a lot better at educating their citizens.
True.
And places like Korea and China are actually paying our universities to train their workforce. And again, you know, John F. Kennedy kind of started this saying we need to educate the world. But I think in that perspective, we need to educate ourselves first and make sure if we want to maintain our lifestyle as a society, we can't educate everybody else in the world to compete against us and beat us. And I think that's where we are. And, you know, this is one of the things that concerns me about some of the rhetoric that has gone on in the last 4 years is, you know, there's been kind of education costs, education costs, education costs. Well, other countries have said, well, that's where we're going to invest. And they're winning the economic battle on the other side. Education does cost. My fear is if we don't change our mindset, we're going to find out what ignorance costs, and it's going to cost a lot more.
You have to look at it as an investment, obviously, and if you don't put money into education.
That's
I guess the question would be, you know, how do you really define how much money you need for a good education? That's the eternal question, right,
Sure.
that we face.
Sure. And, there's a basic level of educational funds that have to be given for every student. But then, depending on a community's needs, there may be courses, programs that are right for that community's population. For example, in Warren and Sussex, we do have lots of agricultural programs in the schools. You might not find that in Bergen or Passaic County. But here in our area, we need those types of programs. So therefore, we need to fund those programs. And in addition, we also talk about the whole child.
Right.
So that it's not just reading, math, it's also science and social studies and technology and music and the arts and physical education and health. It's all types of subject areas because that makes the well-rounded student. And it also engages students in different ways so that a student who's more geared towards the arts and whose brain function learns in that manner will do well in the arts area. That's not to say that we don't need strong science programs, because obviously we do. So you need a full and well-rounded program, particularly at the K-12 level, because that's where students learn to develop their skills and their interests.
And that's really what it takes to prepare them for, we talk about a 21st century
Yes.
education. Of course, we're well into the 21st century at this point. As you pointed out, we may still be trying to work on a 20th century education.
Yeah,
in
I'm
a
afraid
lot of
that's a
these-
problem.
Yeah. How would you define the education that's going to be needed for the next, to really equip yourself for the next 40, 50 years in this country?
Well, I
What has
think we have to get
evolve?
away from this. I think we have to get away from an agrarian model. I think we have to get away from a Carnegie model. I think we have to get away from a model that says this degree is going to give me X. And we have to go towards models of we learn what we need to learn when that is the benefit to us. So it is a continuous process throughout one's life. So this notion of terminal degrees, or I get this degree and then I'm done, that's over. It's I get this set of knowledge and skill set that I need to function in this society at this particular point in time. And then 30 years later, I'm the same person, but I may need a totally different mindset, a totally different education. And it's not a degree. It's an ongoing process. So I think what the community colleges are doing in continuing education or non-credit education is probably the future for our credit-bearing education as well. And I know that most people in higher ed will probably disagree with me. But I think what we're finding is as other countries are kind of advancing, we need to find a way to kind of advance around them. So if they're getting caught up in our degree proliferation that we're caught up in right now, I think that's a great thing. We just need to move away from degree proliferation and move towards knowledge, move towards learning, and move towards a lifelong education.
But let me play devil's advocate for a minute. Given the economy and the pressures of the economy, and the fact that we know that people need skills and training to simply keep their jobs or to get new jobs in this new economy, isn't the danger that we run that education becomes much more utilitarian and much more about chasing that degree?
Well, I think that's what it's become. But I think what you're going to see is as technology advances and as we're able to bring education right to individuals, and as some of the most learned people are putting their stuff out there for free in terms of what's on the internet, we're going to find answers that way and people are going to learn differently. So we're going to have to come back in and credential and somehow test to see that the outcomes are there. Because, for me, a college education was never about a degree. I always thought that was the wrong way to look at it. It was never about what your major was. To be a college-educated person is to be able to do this. I have enough knowledge and skills that I can teach myself anything from this point on. And I can become the driver of my learning environment. It's not that I don't need the teacher, but I need to direct the teacher where to take me on what I need.
You need
and
the
that's
skills.
a college education.
Yeah. You need the skill set that will help you educate yourself.
Exactly.
As you move
So there's
through
a
life.
basic level of knowledge that you need, but really throughout your life, it's a after the fact credentialing that I think we're going to end up moving to. Now I'm going to tell you that's probably 60 years away. It should be 5.
Not in our lifetimes. No. So do you feel like you're feeding into this, and do you think that this is indeed the philosophy that a K-12 system has?
Sure, definitely, because we want to teach our students to actually be lifelong learners. And there is no stopping the knowledge base that someone can acquire with enough guts and enough determination and perseverance. You can't graduate high school thinking that you know it all, obviously, because you are far from it.
Yeah.
But we want to be able to graduate students who understand how to extract meaning from myriad sources that are at their disposal, and how to differentiate amongst those sources as to what is appropriate and what is real for them. Because they can get caught up in all of this technology. There's so many media outlets now, and there's so much information bombarding them. So they need to be masters of that
So-
information technology.
So how are you doing this in schools? How are you helping kids get more technically savvy? But more important than that, I think, being able to distinguish, you can
Exactly.
get the access the information.
Exactly.
I mean, that's one of the reasons we do what we do, is to give
Right.
people food for thought.
Right.
And there's a lot of food for thought out there, but
Yeah.
how do you
Yeah.
really learn how to process that?
Yeah. Well, actually, our state assessments are geared towards making sure that students can differentiate amongst the information that they're getting. They're able to take in information, digest it, and then decide how to create a persuasive argument for or against what they believe in based on that information. So that's really where the training is now in K-12 education. As early as 3rd, 4th grade, we see this on state assessments.
So you've seen a change, definitely, over the course of your career?
It's definitely not just, fill in the bubble, make a choice. Now, a lot of the exams have writing in parts where you have to create an essay, develop a persuasive argument, and make sense out of the
Much more
information.
critical thinking skills
Exactly.
than we used to have.
Exactly.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. So you think that generally we're doing a pretty good job then of preparing our kids?
I really
for
do.
that?
I really do. And as I said, is there always room for improvement? Obviously. But I think our K-12 schools are doing a great job. And particularly New Jersey, if you look at national statistics, I think we're number 4 in the country as far as our student achievement. So, yes, we're doing a great job here in New Jersey.
Let me ask, this is something you may not, it seems pretty far removed from the kids that you're seeing and the adults that you're working with, but in terms of getting our children ready to those critical years, from birth to 5, before you
Sure.
actually enter a kindergarten, that can be a huge advantage for some kids. It can be
Yes.
a huge disadvantage for others. Are we overcoming that gap in New Jersey?
Well, the state has established funding for preschool education in certain critical areas. At-risk students definitely have the advantage of getting some of that state funding for preschool education. We also have a way to identify students with special needs very early, so that by the time students are 3 years old, they can be getting services such as speech therapy, occupational therapy, and the like. Yeah, so we
course.
really do try to concentrate on very young children.
And all of this takes a lot of money
Yes?
to accomplish, and that's the investment that you talked about.
Sure.
Do you think we're doing a good enough job of making education an investment priority in the state?
No. And part of it is the sign of the times. It's you get into this kind of scenario where people feel that times are tough and they look for areas to cut, and you know what happens. We have a lifespan and it's rather long. So if you're younger and you have children in the schools, that becomes a priority to you.
Right.
If you don't have children or your children have graduated, then you have other priorities kind of in life, and you may not be looking at what the long-term investment is. You may not be thinking about it in those terms. So what we end up with is conflict that people take advantage of. That's a naturally occurring conflict, where we kind of have to come together and say, okay, what is the benefit to the society long-term? What is the benefit to me? I mean, in 10 years when my children are no longer in my home and they've graduated, I'll still be a relatively young man. But there won't be but 20 years later where I'm going to need some of these other kids that I'm paying to educate to help take care of me in my later years. And I have to think about it like that. And I'm going to need younger people to make our society flourish that I'll get a benefit from. So it's often that we've become almost a society that looks for immediate gratification in every single form and level. And that you cannot view education that way. You have to view it across the long term. The thing that has made this country the #1 superpower in the world and that sustained us was the GI Bill after World War II. It was the things that we invested in the Kennedy and Johnson administrations that said we're going to educate everyone. This is what made us a powerful nation, and it's what we should stick to. And the reason I know it works is all of the emerging powers in the world are following the model we used 60 years ago, and we can't get away from that model for my own immediate gratification
And
in
as you
life.
point out, they're making those huge leaps that we've made, so they're catching up to us as opposed to our falling behind.
Correct.
In some regards. But
Well, they're
certainly-
surpassing us now. It's worse than just catching up. And we need to refocus our energies on what is going to make us a successful country.
And some would argue that perhaps the political environment in the state, and not to put you in a difficult position here, but that we don't really have a political system from the administration on down that really encourages that long-term investment in something like education where you don't see an immediate payoff. If you're anti-tax, if you're cost, all those things all the time, how do you really bring that focus back to what's important?
Yeah. Well, I think the important thing to remember is that education is expensive, yes, but there are also economies that can be realized. Not everything has to be paid for specifically by the taxpayer. For example, a lot of parents nowadays like to have their kids involved in many different clubs and activities and sports and so forth. One has to ask, is that really something that everyone in the township should pay for and support? Or should it be supported specifically by the parents who would like to see their kids involved in those specific activities? So lots of school districts are starting to put those burdens on the parent and charging some nominal fees for participation in clubs and sports.
Let me ask, is this a trend that you think is a positive trend?
Well, I may disagree a little bit, and here's why. I think it depends on your region. So I think in this region, that's a doable way to cut costs. But if I go to a more urban region and I start to cut sports and activities, that may be the only thing that's drawing some of those students to the school where they're getting the benefit. So, and the parents there may not be able to afford that. $100 to a parent there could be $1 million. It might as well be, because if they don't have it put together, it's more money than they have. So I think that we have to be very careful and look at, in each community, what makes the most sense. So in our community, it may be this. In another community, it may be another way to find economies of scale to do these things. I also think, and I believe this is going to happen by de facto rather than by the law, is that we're going to run out of people who want to be superintendents and college presidents because the nature of the job.
That's what they think is a good thing in New Jersey, right? We're
Probably.
moving towards that anyway.
So that's going to help consolidate things around the state. Well, that will. People always think, well, if we just consolidate, it cuts costs. I've been involved in such enterprises in my career. It's always increased costs unless it's a naturally occurring phenomenon. So when you artificially try to do that, it'll cost more. But if you come at it and it evolves in that direction, I think you'll see some of those kind of costs that drive people crazy go down. And I think when you think about education, here's the thing that I always try to say about, and I worked with a lot of senior citizens when I was a school board president years ago in South Jersey. Here's what I found. If people thought there was a value for what they were paying their taxes for, they were more likely to support it. So we have to find a way for those people who aren't engaged with our schools to see the value back in their personal lives.
And as you point out, a value is different it's a very subjective thing. What's valuable for somebody is not valuable for somebody else.
Correct. So we have to educate our population to understand this, and I think that's where some of our failings have come. We've been too many times, and the way it was structured before, and thank goodness they made some of the changes on the election laws, it's the one time in New Jersey you got to vote on taxes.
Sure.
So people took out any frustration they had about taxes on the education system, and it's just not a way to fund schools. It's kind of it was kind of a silly kind of exercise to go through every couple of years because it just aggravated people more than anything else. And we have to get into, now with our new model, get back into, okay, this is what your school does for you. And we have to get the kids in the community helping to serve the community as they do in other countries. And I think that will help. And people will see, okay, this is what our schools are doing universally for us. We're not just educating a group of kids for the future. We're really getting an overall universal value in this community, and the schools then have to represent the communities they're in. So you're going to see education in our community here because it makes sense. It wouldn't make sense, say, probably in Essex County. So we also have to have this kind of model. So this is where, again, we come back to one of your original questions. If you regulate everything too much and you don't have any flexibility and you don't have any creativity, you don't end up with a good education system.
And yet the danger would be not regulating enough so that it becomes
Sure.
kind of a do-your-own thing and nothing
Yeah.
fits together, and then you end up with all these kids that come from all over the place, and you're kind of there trying to deal with all kinds of different degrees of learning and different
Sure.
degrees of, which doesn't make your task easier.
Who wants an easier task?
And that's where the common
Yeah.
core curriculum comes in, so that every school district adheres to the same standards that students are expected to know and learn. And that's where they can advance readily then into the colleges and into the workforce, because they're coming out of school with the same knowledge base.
You've gone from a classroom teacher to a building principal, as we said, to district superintendent. Has your perspective shifted over the years in terms of where the emphasis needs to be placed in
Oh, I
education?
think so, definitely. As a classroom teacher, unfortunately, very much, you're isolated. You may discuss things with other people in your department, other staff members on committees you might serve on, but your perspective is really that of, what do I have to impart today to these kids? Your perspective definitely changes when you become a building administrator, because then you see how all the departments function together. You get to see the strengths and weaknesses in the particular microcosm that you're involved with. And then, getting to be the superintendent, you deal certainly much more with the community. And you get to understand what the community is valuing, and where the connections should be made, as was discussed before. And it's very important as the district leader to understand that you're the academic leader first, you're the instructional leader, and you also have to understand where your community is seeing the school district. In other words, are they seeing it as something that's bringing value to themselves as a community? And I think that's...
We're evolving as a state and in the way we...
I think we are. I think we are definitely engaging the community more as stakeholders in the entire process. I know when I was the district superintendent, we had to have referendums for various building projects and the like. You had to understand, what is it that your community is going to support? Do they really want to see a better facility, and why? When we had a huge building referendum in Mount Olive, we linked it to the fact that this would help our academic programs flourish, because we were able to bring in new science labs. We were going to organize the classrooms so that math and science were together, so that the arts were together, so that it would flow from a facility need to an academic environment that would be beneficial to the students. And when people understood that, they came out and supported that referendum, and the vote was actually 3-1 in favor. So it is essential to involve your community and to help them to understand what they're paying for and what the value is to them.
So
And
your
I think
task
we're
as an
doing that
educator
more.
is really not just to educate the children, but to educate the community.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
The reforms that are being put in place now in the department, do you see those as being long-term changes that, do we run the danger of just having those be administrative changes and structural changes that can be abolished by the next administration if they don't share the same values? Or do you think there's really they're going to make a difference and be in place?
I think it's actually deep-seated reform this time. I absolutely do. Because the very nature of how we're going to interact with our students, our community, and how we're going to hold teachers and schools accountable, that's a fundamental reform that I think will be very long-lived.
And do you feel the same way? You feel like we're...
I think the reforms that we're making, we're going in the right direction. I think they began with No Child Left Behind, and they've grown from that, and we've seen administrations come in at state level and federal level that have changed, but they haven't really attacked and said, let's do a massive reversal of what we've done. They've said, this is a problem, this is an issue, we have to move forward from here, and they build upon one another. And I think the educators in our community and the administrators have said, yeah, we need to continue to build upon these things, these successes that we've had, and I think that has benefited us a great deal.
And do you feel that you've got a strong working relationship in the community with the elected officials, the community members, that all of this is positive and helps you grow here as a college?
Well, I certainly hope so, and certainly that's something that we definitely strive for. It makes no sense for us to become an isolated entity over here, serving our own egos or our own mission without really realizing that our mission is to serve this community. So as long as we keep focused on that and we're out in the community, we're talking to the elected officials, we're talking to the K-12 leaders, we're talking to the business leaders, then we can ultimately build a college here that makes sense for the people here. But they're the drivers. The students are the drivers, the community is the driver, the elected officials and the businesses we serve are the drivers, and we're the servants. And as long as we maintain that philosophy and that mentality, this college will do well.
And do you see students coming in who are more prepared to shape their futures and feel that they're more empowered to determine what happens to them educationally?
The beauty of a community college is we have those students who are focused, driven, and know exactly what they want to do and have a clear picture of the future. And then we have the student who has no idea what they want to do. They have no family support. They may be going and doing this all on their own because a high school guidance counselor said you have some potential. But they show up at our door and they have not the first idea what they should do, and that's why we're here. And and that's one of the beauties of the mission of the community college, and it's one of the things I do fear when we get into all these economic discussions, that the access kind of mission that we have starts to go away, and people say, well, it's not for everyone, they shouldn't come. The community colleges is for the entire community.
It should be for everyone.
When they need us. And sometimes that's going to be someone 18, sometimes it's going to be someone 50, sometimes it's going to be someone 65 years old. But the important thing is that we're here and ready to serve the community when it needs us, and that we're willing to change based on what this community needs and how this community evolves. We are this community.
It's a terrific philosophy. Let me close by asking both of you, and this is just, my head's kind of spinning, not just from the cold medication, but because we've done a wide range of issues here today. If you had your magic wand and you could say, I just want this to happen, especially given your perspective, in education, what would you say would be the one thing you'd like to see, that just, whatever you had the power to make happen, what would that be?
Well, I think I would probably want to see kids today think a lot more about math and science and technology careers, because I think for too long many of our students have geared themselves more towards what I would call the softer sciences, and I think, quite frankly, that we might have enough interior designers in the country. And
enough English teachers?
And yes, even English teachers. And we definitely need more science-related
But aren't we making a huge
subjects
push?
and careers. I don't think we're making enough of a push yet. I think there's definitely a start towards that. I think our administration and our government leaders are realizing that that is the future of our country. But I don't think that that's actually sunk down to the average household. When parents talk to their students about what they would like to major in, it's almost like the field is wide open, and
Well,
yes.
you're still getting the parents' perspective, too.
Exactly.
And my generation really wasn't trained to
Exactly.
appreciate math and science.
Yeah, so I think we need to really start thinking about how we can strengthen those subjects which our country is in such dire need of. I've talked to business leaders also, and they say, we're simply not finding people with the technical and scientific knowledge here in this country, so that we're forced to go overseas to find talent. And it's not because of economics, it's simply because the talent pool does not exist yet here in the United
And
States.
perhaps building the foundation for someone to
Exactly.
acquire the technical knowledge
Exactly.
that they're going to need later on.
Yeah.
So,
And that love of learning, to instill that love of learning so that that never dies.
And from your perspective,
Well, I mean, I don't disagree at all. I think one of the worst things that ever happened here is someone came up with this idea, I'm not good at math, or I'm a person who doesn't know how to do math. Well, how
there's a
come?
reason some of us think that,
No,
I would
it's-
just say.
It's silly. I mean, after Sputnik, what, did everybody get I mean, was it, the Sputnik went up, we got scared, and everybody became a mathematician all of a sudden? The gene pool shifted at that moment? I mean, it's an
It's a question of
unbelievable
focus, too, yeah.
kind of mentality. And, I have it too, not in math. I can actually do math. But, Spanish I could never do. Now, I would always say, well, I must have an aversion to foreign languages. That's an easy way out. Here's the deal. If all of a sudden I found myself living in a Spanish country, I guarantee you within 3 months I could speak Spanish. It's just a matter of I don't want to right now. And we have to get people to want to do these things. The other kind of change I think that would be significantly good if I could wave my magic wand is to get everybody to remember this country was founded as a republic. Voting on everything leads to mediocrity every single day of the week. And that's why Ben Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, and John Adams and George Washington said, we gave you a republic. What you do with it now is up to you.
Exactly.
When they left the Independence Hall in Philadelphia. Well, we've transformed it into a democracy, and then we've watched ourselves kind of fall in all the categories against the rest of the world. So we have to get back to how the country was founded and what we were trying to do, where we get people together who have great skills of knowledge, and we say to them, what is the right future for our society? And we start to listen to them again. I mean, I love Tom Cruise and entertainers as much as everyone, but we probably shouldn't be letting them decide public policy. They're good at pretending to be somebody else.
Well, actually, the whole premise of the council is that public policy is for everybody, so.
Yes.
But we want to give them some guidance along the way. And I think with this discussion this morning, we've certainly given everyone a lot of food for thought. So thank you very much again for hosting us today and for being part of this panel. And Dr. Lamonte, thank you for being here as well.
Thanks for
Thank you all
having
for
me.
joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.